You watched it die, that tomato plant you spent $40 on. Between the pot and the soil, and the cage and the feed, you watched it yellow from the bottom up in July. By August, it was a brown stick with 3 cracked fruit hanging off it, like some kind of joke the universe was telling at your expense. And you blamed yourself, you blamed the heat, you blamed the fact that you forgot to water on that one Thursday. And then you did what everyone does. You ripped it all out in October, threw the dead stems in a bin bag, and told yourself next spring would be different. But next spring was not different. It was the same $60 at the garden center, the same flat of seedlings, lined up in their little plastic cells, like prisoners waiting to be transferred. The same 3 months of daily watering and weekly feeding, and constant vigilance against slugs and aphids and blight, and the same slow collapse by midsummer, the same guilt, the same quiet decision to just buy the tomatoes from the store and never talk about it again. And here is what no one said to you during any of that. Not the garden center, not the seed catalog, not the cheerful YouTube video with the woman in the clean gloves, holding a perfect basket of peppers. No one told you that the system you were following, the flat annual vegetable bed, the single season row of crops planted in spring and ripped out in fall, is a system that is architecturally designed to fail. It is not failing because you're lazy. It is not failing because your soil is wrong, or your climate is difficult, or you lack some secret knowledge that real gardeners possess. It is failing because it was never built to sustain itself. It was built to consume you, your time every morning, your money every spring, your hope every single year, extracted and spent, and never compounded into anything that lasts beyond September. You've been operating inside a one-dimensional food system, a flat grid, a single plane of production that captures maybe 10% of the vertical space above your soil and returns it to zero every winter. A system that is always starting over, always demanding reconstruction, always eating your weekends and your budget, and giving you back a handful of beans and a sense of failure. So familiar it has started to feel like a personality trait. And the proof is not abstract. The proof is the exposed dirt. In your raised bed right now, in the middle of winter, producing nothing, protecting nothing, building nothing. The proof is the $70 bag of compost you'll buy in March to replace what washed away because nothing alive was holding that soil in place. The proof is that after 3 or 5 or 10 years of this cycle, you do not have a food system. You have an annual subscription to disappointment with a side of grocery store dependence. This is not a gardening problem. This is a structural trap. And the way out is not to try harder inside the same architecture. The way out is to abandon the architecture entirely and replace it with something that does not reset to zero every autumn. Something that stacks, something that compounds, something that, once established in the same 30 square feet you have been failing in, produces not 20 pounds of annual vegetables across one flat season, but 10 times that weight across 5 vertical layers every single year without asking you to rebuild it from scratch. So why does your patch of earth refuse to do what every forest on the planet does without intervention? Why does your soil sit there, dead and compacted, producing nothing unless you pour money into it every single spring? The answer is not that you lack skill. The answer is that someone sold you a system engineered to keep you buying. You tilled the bed. You were told to till the bed. Every gardening book, every weekend television segment, every helpful neighbor with a rotavator said the same thing. Turn the soil, break it up, let the air in. And what you actually did was sever a fungal network that took years to build, miles of microscopic threads, connecting root to root, plant to plant, shuttling phosphorus and nitrogen and water to wherever the system needed it most. You destroyed the internet beneath your feet, and then wondered why nothing could communicate anymore. And you did it again the next spring, and the spring after that, every year resetting the clock to zero on a biological infrastructure that needed continuity to function. Then you added the fertilizer, the granular stuff in the green box, the liquid feed in the bottle with the tomato on the label. And what that fertilizer did was flood the root zone with synthetic nitrogen, so concentrated that it burned out the very organisms responsible for delivering nutrients. Naturally, the mycorrhizal fungi that would have extended your plant's root reach by a factor of 100 simply died. They were no longer needed. The plant stopped investing in the partnership because you made it dependent on the chemical instead. You created an addict, and then blamed the addict for needing another fix in 6 weeks. And the bagged soil, the so-called nutrient-rich growing medium, you spent $9 a bag, filling raised beds with sterilized, pasteurized, emptied of every living microbe that would have formed the immune system your plants required to fight disease and process minerals on their own. You bought dead substrate and expected life to emerge from it. And when the blight came, when the aphids massed, when the leaves yellowed in July, you bought the spray, the fungicide that killed the last beneficial organisms, still trying to colonize that sterile ground, the herbicide that eliminated the deep-rooted weeds, whose only crime was pulling minerals from the subsoil and making them available at the surface. Every product solved the problem. The previous product created every purchase, justified the next purchase. And the system never told you that a single fruit tree planted into undisturbed ground, its roots wrapped in living fungal partnerships, its leaf litter cycling, fertility back into the surface every autumn, will outproduce your entire raised bed operation within 3 years and keep producing for 3 decades. Without a single bag, bottle, or box from the garden center. That is not a gardening failure, that is a business model, built on your repeated starting over. And the moment you stop participating in it, the moment you refuse to till and refuse to feed and refuse to spray, something ancient and self-repairing begins to reassemble itself beneath your feet. There is a law written into every forest on this planet that you were never taught, not in school, not in any gardening book sold at the hardware store, not by anyone who profits from selling you seeds in spring and fertilizer in summer. And it is so simple, so mechanically obvious once you see it, that you'll feel something close to anger when you realize it was hidden from you in plain sight. The law is this: nature doesn't grow food in one flat plane, it stacks production vertically, layer over layer over layer, each one occupying a different slice of sunlight, each one feeding the layer below it, each one producing on a different calendar, so that something is always ripening, always falling, always becoming available. A forest is not a field, it is a tower of yields compressed into the same square footage of earth. And the moment you understand that your backyard is not a flat surface, but a vertical column of unused space, the entire economics of feeding yourself changes overnight. Look at what a single hazel tree does. When you place it in the understory of a larger canopy, it reaches maturity in 3 to 5 years. It produces nuts every autumn, and when those nuts are finished, it gives you something else. Straight poles every single year, poles that become your bean supports, your tomato stakes, your pea frames. You never buy bamboo canes again. You never buy plastic clips again. The tree doesn't just feed you, it supplies the infrastructure for everything else you grow. And while it does all of this, its roots are pulling nitrogen from bacterial colonies in the soil and depositing it exactly where your ground-level plants need it most. 1 organism, 3 functions, 0 ongoing cost. That isn't gardening advice. That is a biological law, operating whether you notice it or not. And below that understory, the shrub layer runs the same code at a different frequency. Currants fruiting in July, gooseberries arriving in June when nothing else is ready. Raspberries stretching from midsummer into October. A single planting, $60 in bare rootstock, producing 80 pounds of fruit 9 years later and compounding. Still, you plant it once, you prune it once a year, you mulch it in winter, and it hands you a rolling sequence of harvests, week after week, month after month, so continuous that your freezer fills itself and your pantry lines itself with jars you never purchased from a store. This is the law that was stripped from you, not a single miracle crop, not a single breakthrough technique. A structural principle: stack vertically, stagger temporally. Let each layer feed the next. The forest has been running this algorithm for 400 million years, and it never once required a bag of fertilizer or a trip to the garden center. You were taught to grow food in rows, because rows are easy to sell inputs to, but the code that actually works, the code that compounds year over year and generates abundance from neglect, operates in layers. And once you rebuild even 3 of those layers in your own ground, something shifts. The system stops asking from you and starts giving back. 7 years ago, I pushed a handful of knobbly tubers into the worst soil I had, the shadiest corner. Spot where annual seeds rotted before they ever broke surface. I did nothing else, no amendments, no watering schedule, no follow-up. And every autumn since, that forgotten corner hands me 50 to 60 pounds of sweet, crisp Jerusalem artichokes without a single minute of additional labor. That is the lever. That is the part no one believes until they see it happening in their own ground. You've been told that growing food means planting in spring and tearing out in fall, every year starting over, every year buying seed, every year rebuilding what winter destroyed. And that cycle is not gardening. That is a subscription service disguised as self-reliance. The ecological lever is the moment you break that loop with one decision so small it feels like cheating. You stop replanting, you put a living thing into the earth that refuses to die, and you walk away. Asparagus crowns pushed into a trench one afternoon 7 years ago. I didn't touch them for 3 full seasons. And then April came, and spears broke through the mulch, without permission, without fertilizer, without me. 6 weeks of harvest. Then I stepped back and let the ferny tops feed the roots all summer, and the following April they came again and again. And they'll keep coming for 20 more years. From an afternoon of work I barely remember doing perennial kale planted once in a single autumn. It has fed me every week from September through April. For 4 consecutive years, I've never resounded. Globe artichokes, whose taproots punched 3 feet down into compacted clay and cracked it open, creating drainage channels that every neighboring plant now drinks from, a carpet of wild strawberries laid along bed edges that suppresses every weed beneath it, while handing me fruit from May to September. None of this required a plan, none of it required a budget. It required one counter-intuitive act of faith. Put a perennial in the ground, and do less next season, not more. And here is what breaks people's brains. The spaces between those permanent plants still grow annual food. Salad leaves in the gaps, radishes tucked into edges, climbing beans spiraling up into the shrub. Layer above, blurring every boundary you thought existed between layers. The perennials hold the structure, the annuals fill the cracks, and you're no longer rebuilding a garden every spring. You're harvesting from a system that was already running before you woke up. The root layer underground is your final insurance. Oca producing its lemony tubers in November, when every other harvest has ended. Horseradish in a forgotten corner that regenerates from any fragment left behind. These crops don't ask for your attention. They don't ask for your money. They ask for exactly one thing: to be planted once and then left alone. The less you intervene, the deeper they establish. The deeper they establish, the more they yield. You're not managing this system. You're getting out of its way. There will come a morning when the shelves are bare. You've seen the photographs. You've watched the footage from every supply chain collapse in the last 5 years. The fluorescent lights still buzzing, the refrigerated cases still humming, and nothing behind the glass, nothing on the pallets, nothing in the backhand. On that morning, 2 kinds of people exist. The first is standing in a parking lot at 6 in the morning, refreshing an app, hoping a delivery slot opens, hoping the truck arrives, hoping the price hasn't doubled again since yesterday. And the second is walking into their backyard with a bucket, pulling Jerusalem artichokes from soil that has been building itself for a decade, cutting perennial kale that nobody planted this year because nobody needed to, reaching into a canopy that has been compounding fruit since before the crisis had a name. That second person didn't get lucky. They didn't inherit land. They didn't spend thousands. They spent less than $200 across 3 winters, and then they stopped. They stopped buying. They stopped begging. They stopped depending on a chain of trucks and warehouses and algorithms to decide whether their family eats today. I think about the man I was before this, dependent, completely, quietly dependent. Every calorie brokered through someone else's logistics. Every meal contingent on a system. Didn't control and couldn't see. And I called that normal. I called that convenience. I never called it what it actually was, which is vulnerability. dressed in plastic packaging. You don't need a farm, you don't need permission. You don't need a single season of experience. You need a bare root apple tree. This February, you need 6 hazel whips pushed into the ground along your boundary. You need a single row of Jerusalem artichokes in the worst corner you have. And you need to understand that every month you delay is another month. You remain a consumer instead of a producer. Another month, your family's food exists only as a transaction someone else can cancel. The best time to plant the canopy layer was 20 years ago. The second best time is the next frost-free weekend you have. Start there, build the shrub layer around it next autumn. Let the root layer establish below. While you're not watching,